Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm joined by Jason Negri, author and speaker on end-of-life issues and the principal attorney of the law issues of Jason Negri, policy advisor for the Patient Rights Action Fund. And we're talking about the realities of physician-assisted suicide. Jason, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Marcus?
Very well, thank you. Glad that you brought our attention to this event. I want to begin by making sure we get the information about the event out. So tell us about it, please.
Sure. So it's a panel discussion taking place. Three of us are going to be speaking for a little while on the realities and the dangers of physician-assisted suicide from a public policy perspective. And it's going to be taking place at Wayne State University next Monday, the talks start around 7 o'clock. There's a social time beforehand, but we're going to take the stage at 7 p.m. That's Monday, April 13th.
Monday, April the 13th, as Jason just mentioned, start time is 6 p.m. We'll have this information in the description of today's program. The name of the panel discussion is The Realities of Physician-Assisted Suicide. Jason, from a broad picture perspective, can you share with us first the terrible way in which it's being enacted in the West, but especially in Canada?
Canada is, of course, the worst example we've got of the realization of our worst fears. All the things that we talk about and warn about when this issue gets brought up in a particular state are actually coming to pass in Canada as a result of their disastrous passing of a law allowing what they euphemistically call medical aid in dying, which is really the legalization of assisted suicide. And for all the supposed safeguards that they put on it when it was first passed, everything was just thrown out the window and expanded in their court system in 2019, when the Appeals Court of Ontario basically said this is now a constitutional right for Canadians. And what that means, particularly for healthcare practitioners, is they are not allowed to say no. That's one of the most pernicious things here, right? Everybody talks about, there's conscience protection, and nobody's going to be forced to participate in this if they're really opposed to it. Well, that's how this one started out in Canada. And then with this court case, they specifically said, we recognize that forcing doctors and nurses to participate in the suicide of their patients might be something that these people oppose, and it might in fact be trampling on their constitutional rights to religious freedom. But it doesn't matter because those rights are trumped by the rights of patients to receive what they now consider to be standard medical care, the right to, quote, die. So that's just the most pernicious example of it. But the whole idea of passing these laws in a given state and then working to remove all of the safeguards and the guardrails that were supposedly put in the law to begin with to ensure its passage, that is exactly what we've seen happen in so many states.
Tell us about that. How many states have pushed to legalize it and what we've seen thus far?
Yeah, well, right now I think we're up to 10 states with last year's acceptance in Virginia, and New York is the most recent to accept assisted suicide as a legitimate medical treatment. So we're now looking at 10 or 11 states where it's legal in those jurisdictions. And in the places where it started, this started on the West Coast with Oregon, and then Washington 10 years later, and then California and Colorado, little by little, all of these states have fallen in a domino effect. Not as rapidly as we feared. We've been able to hold the line in a lot of states. But in the states that were early adopters of this, we're seeing efforts to remove the 2-week cooling off period, right, the 2-week waiting period between when the patient first makes the request versus when the doctor can actually fulfill the lethal prescription to kill their patient. That's one thing that they try to get rid of almost immediately. They remove the state requirement, so that enables suicide tourism for people to just travel to a state where it's legal and take advantage of it. There's no requirement of residency in those states anymore. They've drastically expanded who can actually do this. When it starts as just board-certified doctors, now we're looking at nurse practitioners and nurses being able to administer these, to write these prescriptions and maybe administer these doses if the patient clearly communicates their intent. Those are just some examples. When a legislature is first considering this idea of legalizing assisted suicide, many people have misgivings about this, right? Well, we're opening the door to euthanasia. We're expressing a policy position that some people's lives aren't worth living and they should therefore be permitted to just give up and die, and society is going to turn its back on them. People are uncomfortable with that, and they are somewhat placated by the existence of some of these supposed safeguards that the law's proponents put in place, because they know that's what's going to persuade them. The few times, the times this has come up in front of a state legislature when they've been considering this, it's usually passed by only a vote or two. And the people who are on the fence and uncertain about it have been tipped over to supporting it because these safeguards are in place, and they don't think there's going to be abuse, and they think it's going to be cabined into just the people who really need it. And then as soon as that happens, within a couple of years, the proponents go back and keep whittling away at it and removing the very safeguards that enabled its passage to begin with. So, I mean, that's just the political realities of this. The fundamental impact of society accepting this so-called right to die essentially means that the medically vulnerable have no defense against the unmistakable pressure that society and now the law is going to put on them to just get out of the way if their lives aren't, quote, worth living.
What have we seen in terms of the rights of families to intervene and to make sound medical decisions for their loved ones?
Well, that's related, of course. You know, many states have statutes in place that say that if you haven't executed your own medical advance directive, there's kind of a pecking order presumed for families to be able to make these types of decisions for you. And of course, that's a concern that, you know, right now, that's one of the limitations and safeguards that's in place, where only the patient themselves can express their wish to die and to get the lethal dose of medication to end their life. But as soon as the momentum shifts sufficiently, I have no doubt we're going to see that right to request lethal drugs passed on and be permitted to come from family members who have been entrusted to make medical decisions. Because remember, we're talking about, you know, a changing standard of medical care. And once society accepts the idea that assisted suicide is a legitimate medical treatment, then it becomes just like any other medical treatment. Somebody else can make the decision for you. It might be subsidized by the government. You know, this is always going to be the cheapest option no matter what. Health insurance companies are already in favor of this because it's going to be a lot cheaper for them to pay, $100 or so for a lethal dose of medication to kill the patient versus the amount of money they're spending right now on medical therapeutics to actually help people cope with their symptoms and their conditions, which is what we expect the medical insurance system to do. That's what it's for. But let's not forget the financial incentive that's going to be brought to bear once this is completely accepted as a medical treatment everywhere. Like I said, we're still holding the line. It's still only a minority of states that actually accept this. But if this goes much further, if we accept it in Michigan when this comes around again, if other states fall, there's going to be an outcry for transitioning to this new mental concept that this is a legitimate medical treatment and should be treated as such by everybody. And the examples we've seen of this happening in Europe, for example, and what's happening before our eyes in Canada right now, where euthanasia is actually the fifth leading cause of death for people in the nation. Other nations that have done this, even the architects of those laws have spoken out on record, urging other states and nations not to follow their example because they have seen what happens when the standard of medical care changes. There's no longer any money spent on palliative care. There's no longer any money spent on pain control. Hospices are practically non-existent in the Netherlands at this point because why spend valuable resources on legitimate traditional end-of-life medical care when everybody is expected to just get out of the way? That's the big problem here is the mental transition that takes place in a society that accepts this. The mental idea that people who have certain conditions or are old or in some way incapacitated, the medically vulnerable is the term I prefer to use. These people are most at risk because they're going to be pressured to just give up and kill themselves.
We're out of time in this segment, Jason, but the most immediate thing that people can do is to create advanced medical directives for themselves and also be a part of this conference.
Yes, if they can attend this panel discussion, I'm sharing the stage with two other experts who know a lot about this. It's going to be a really good talk, and it only lasts an hour, from 7 to 8 next Monday at Wayne State.
7 to 8 next Monday, that's April the 13th at Wayne State. So please be there. The information will be on the description of today's program. I've been talking with Jason Negri, Patient Rights Action, a part of the Patient Rights Action Fund, about the realities of physician-assisted suicide. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.